Hello, I'm Dennis. Welcome back to my channel. For Father's Day this year, I got my father Stephen King's most recent release, If It Bleeds. My dad's always really been a big fan of Stephen King. He has a ton of his books sitting in his room in his bookshelf. So I thought for Father's Day this year it would be a perfect idea to get him his most recent release, and it is titled If It Bleeds. Now, I've actually never read a Stephen King book before, so before I gave it to him for Father's Day, I wanted to read through it myself, see what all the hype was about. So, I read Stephen King's If It Bleeds, so you don't have to.
Disclaimer, there will be spoilers. Here are the timestamps for each story, if you'd like to skip to a specific section. Also available in the description.
So, the first story in this 4-story collection is called Mr. Harrigan's Phone. It's about the unique relationship between a young boy named Craig and this rich, retired investor named Mr. Harrigan. Mr. Harrigan is the type of old fart who doesn't really like using technology. He's really reluctant to use it. So when Craig gives him an iPhone, he refuses to use it until Craig shows him the stocks apps and how he can read magazines on his phone without waiting them to come to his door himself. So he was like, whoa, that's really cool. Mr. Harrigan ends up loving the phone, but he dies because he's old as hell. At his funeral, Craig takes the iPhone that he gifted Mr. Harrigan and slips it in his chest pocket before the casket gets shut. So he's down there 6 feet under with this cell phone, and Craig, being the weirdo he is, he's like, Mr. Harrigan, I miss you, when obviously Mr. Harrigan is dead. Craig comes to realize that Mr. Harrigan's spirit is basically trapped in this phone, and he uses this to his advantage in a deadly but deemed necessary way. Craig and Mr. Harrigan's relationship basically proves that even though someone dies, the friendship doesn't have to die. I feel that's what the symbolism is in this story. To be honest, this wasn't anything extremely scary or creepy. I know that Stephen King has his motif or his genre is horror and thriller stuff. This wasn't really that scary, which I wasn't disappointed in any way. I thought it was a really good story. I thought the characters were the most developed in this story compared to the other 4, and their exploration of their friendship was really interesting to read about. And this story to me had a really satisfying ending. I know that a lot of Stephen King books, I know he's notorious for having really shitty endings for some reason. I don't really know why, but this story ended just fine. I really liked this story. Overall, the entire plot and all the characters, it all came together. It came to be a really, really solid story that I enjoyed. And I'd rate Mr. Harrigan's Phone 4 scratch-off tickets out of 5. Alright, so the second story in this set of 4 is called The Life of Chuck. The Life of Chuck is a story told in 3 acts in reverse chronological order, so the story starts with the 3rd act. The 3rd act is about the world slowly ending in this apocalyptic manner, and the only thing that all of the citizens of this world can see on billboards, ads, on television, on Netflix, on the radio, in the windows is this phrase that says 39 great years. Thanks, Chuck. So all the citizens are left wondering who is Chuck? Why? What did he do? Why 39 great years? He retired? Why is this everywhere to be seen? During this act, it cuts to a scene where this man is laying in a hospital bed surrounded by his family. He's basically on his deathbed. And it is Chuck, and he is about to die. The world described in the beginning of the act basically ends once Chuck ends. In the 2nd act, we learn more about Chuck's character and his personality as Chuck dances with some strangers in the middle of the street for whatever reason. That's all that really happened in that act from what I can remember. It wasn't anything spectacular. And the 1st act goes more into his backstory, his family, how he lived with his grandparents most of his life, and that his grandparents had some paranormal experiences that Chuck also once had, once his grandparents died. Honestly, the story was the worst of the four, which really upsets me because the third act really started out strong. Like, I was excited to read the rest of the story after the third act, but it just kind of went downhill from there. Like, I don't know, like the third act was just so weird and freaky, like the world is ending for no explicit reason, and it turns out that it's not like an actual world, it's just Chuck's internal world. Like, once he ends, everything up here ends. Like, yeah, Act 2 was cute and whatever, but like, it wasn't anything spectacular, and Act 1 was just kind of boring, and just the first and second acts were just so underwhelming compared to the third. And when it's told in reverse chronological order, when you give me the third act and set it up so that I have such high expectations, I'm expecting the first and second act to be just as interesting, but it wasn't. I hated that ending. So overall, I'm giving The Life of Chuck 2 crescent moons out of 5.
If you made it this far, thank you. Don't be afraid to like and subscribe to my channel. Click on the bell to get instant notifications when I upload new videos. Your support means a lot to me. Anyway, back to the video.
Alright, so the third story in this book is the, I guess you could say the title story, If It Bleeds. If It Bleeds is about Holly Gibney, a private investigator who looks into the bombing of a Pennsylvania school. The reporter who is on the scene after it happens, Chet Ondowski, smells kind of fishy to Holly, and it turns out that he's been shape-shifting for like years, since the 80s, and travels to all these different tragedies to like feed off of them, like some sort of vampire feeding off the negative energy and just the tragic energy each site gives off. So he comes to tragedies like 9/11, the Parkland shooting, the Pulse shooting, like shootings and like tragic events such as that. And all of the reporters who are at the scene first of each tragedy over the years, they each have like similar facial structures and similar voice tones as Chet Ondowski. So it all seems kind of fishy to Holly. So he's been doing this for such a long time that eventually he gets so hungry that he doesn't want to just report and be there when the tragedies happen. He wants to actually start causing these tragedies. So Chet Ondowski, this shapeshifter, causes this Pennsylvanian bombing of a middle school. So basically it's Holly's mission to stop Chet Ondowski from doing this more. If It Bleeds is a sequel to one of Stephen King's books called The Outsider. But this is my first Stephen King book, so obviously I haven't read The Outsider. But this book by itself explained the plot and the characters well enough that this sequel could stand alone. I had just a fine time understanding what was going on. I didn't feel lost by any of the characters or any of the events from previous books that were slightly referenced. I was able to just follow along pretty fine. And I enjoyed the fact that I could follow along without having to understand. I felt, as a new reader of his novels, I didn't feel scared or pushed away. The weirdest part of the story to me is how Chet Ondowski doesn't deny the fact that he's basically a shapeshifter when Holly confronts him about it, which to me, I feel like you would. Like, you don't want people finding out your identity, so you would hide and like not be obvious about the fact that you're a shapeshifter. So like the fact that he didn't deny it and he acknowledged it when Holly confronted him about it just seemed really weird to me. And it wasn't like a bad weird, it was just a character trait that I wasn't expecting from a character like him. Holly's characterization and her family backstory was a really nice touch that I like reading about, because the whole book is really chaotic, but Holly's family and her things that she has to go through by herself were just as chaotic, and it kind of had that balance between like monster chaos, Holly's chaos, monster chaos, Holly's chaos. So like we got two different like genres of chaos explored in the book, and I just thought that was interesting. My favorite scene in this book is when Holly travels to go visit this old man named Dan and his grandson Brad. Basically what they've been doing since the 80s is pinpointing every single one of Chet Ondowski's different altars, and like they have like all of the video clips and like pictures of him, like voice recordings comparing how all the voice tones are the same and how he has the same like vocal tics throughout all these years, which basically proves that he's been shape-shifting and goes to all these tragedies. The analysis of all of these tragedies and like how deep they think into it, I just thought it was really interesting to see, especially since they're like real life tragedies being tied into a fictional world. But it's kind of weird to me that such recent tragedies like Parkland and Pulse were mentioned in the book, because to me they feel like yesterday, like these happened so recently. So it just feels weird that they're relevant, or like enough time has passed that you can mention them in a fictional book without it being, I don't know, I guess shameful. But I don't know, it just feels like really weird to me that like that happened a lot longer ago than I feel like it did. Like I feel like it was yesterday that I saw Parkland on the news. But besides all that, overall I'd give If It Bleeds 3 bronze acorns out of 5. The fourth and final story in this 4-story collection is called Rat, and it is about an author named Drew who goes up to this cabin to try and write a novel in basically complete isolation. The last time he wrote a novel completely went to shit. He tried burning the transcript, which almost burned his house down. So when he poses the idea that he wants to write a novel again, his family and his friends are really reluctant to support him on it, but he ends up going to the cabin anyway to focus and sit down and write this novel. He ends up getting extremely sick during this storm, so he's essentially forced to stay there by himself. Like, he doesn't have a choice, and he continues to write, but it gets harder and harder because the man's is sick. During the storm, he hears this like scratching at the door, and he opens it up. There's a rat there, just chilling, just vibing, so he decides to take him in. The rat is basically dead, but he decides to take him in anyway so that he can warm up and die, I guess. When he goes to bed, he wakes up and finds that this rat that he just brought in is talking to him and gives him this deal. And this deal is that in order to finish this novel, someone close to him has to die. This someone is his old man teacher friend, who has pancreatic cancer, and Drew says that he's going to die anyway, so he decides to take the deal, finish the novel. Pancreatic cancer guy dies. So he finishes the novel, gets published, everything is great, huge success, wow, amazing, yay. But his friend and his wife died, not from pancreatic cancer, but in a car accident. Aww. Now this story was just a whole package to read and unwrap, because it just kind of got weirder as you kept on going and going. Things got weird. I feel like I can kind of relate to Drew, because to me, he just seems like a bit of a perfectionist. And if you know me, same. Like what happened with his previous novel, like how he almost burned his house down because it wasn't good enough. Me, insisting everything is fine, even though he is like very, very sick and very much so not fine. Me too, bro. I am Drew. That's me. Stephen King wrote about me. Like, I'm in this book. That's me. It's me. I feel like, in my opinion, Drew shouldn't really feel that guilty that he made the deal with the rat and, like, basically made it so that his friend would die. Because, like Drew said, he was going to die anyway. And I don't really think he actually made a deal. I think it was kind of just all in his imagination. Like, I think the rat, to me, it just seemed like a really big fever dream, because he was feeling feverish before the rat came. He was extremely sick. So I think he just kind of internalized the rat and, like, manifested this rat into his dreams. And it was just some weird coincidence that the guy and his wife died in a car accident. I really don't think it was as deep as Drew made it out to be. He was going to finish this novel, like, no matter what. He was very strict and set on making sure this novel got done. So whether or not he made this deal, he was going to finish this novel. He was going to get it published. He was a successful author of short stories and stuff like that, so he is established. So I feel like there wasn't really any doubt that he was going to finish the story. There are also, like, moments in which he's having conversations with people when he gets home, and he keeps on mistaking words that they say, like right, as rat. So it just keeps on haunting him and reaffirming that this deal that he made, it's his fault that they died, you know? Like, the rat is mentioned over and over and over again. But for me, I feel like that's just guilt taking over. Me and Drew were pretty similar because we feel like everything is our fault, even if it has nothing to do with us. So I just think Drew is overthinking this big fever dream that he's having. And, like, it's a really weird story. And it is freaky nonetheless. And I enjoyed it. So I'm giving Rat 4 cowboy hats out of 5. For my first Stephen King book, I liked it quite a bit. And I think it's a good introduction to the type of stories he writes. Like, but what do I know? I've never read Stephen King before, so, like, I don't know what's good, what's bad. I read a lot of other reviews talking about this book, and for longtime readers of his stories, If It Bleeds turned out to be really underwhelming, and a lot of people didn't really care for it. But I thought it was great, so, like, my opinion on Stephen King can only go up from here. I'm pretty sure Maine, the state of Maine, was mentioned in all 4 of his stories. And, like, I understand that's where Stephen King is from. Like, I understand why he would mention Maine. But, like, come on. Can't you just, like, spice it up just a little bit? How many stories do you read that take place in Wyoming? Or Montana? Or Rhode Island? I never hear stories about those states. They're very underloved. I don't care about Maine. I don't need to hear about Maine in 4 different stories. Live it up a little, Stephen. Also, I read there were a lot of, like, jabs and references towards Donald Trump, the current, president of the United States. And, like, yeah, Trump sucks. Go off. Like, I totally agree, he's awful. But, like, the little, like, jabs at him in the stories didn't really make sense as to why they would be in the story. Like, I guess it adds to the reader that these stories take place, like, right now, like, in 2020 or 2019, and that sort of time period. But other than that, it didn't really add to the plot, didn't really add to the characters, didn't really add any depth, just, like, a little tiny detail of setting. So I just didn't really see why he had to get brought up at all. Like, obviously, it's the author's decision, it's the creative process, it's the creative choices he wants to make. But it just, to me, it didn't really add anything, and it kind of, not turned me off, but it just, sit kind of funny reading about Trump in stories that had nothing to do with Trump. The last thing I want to bring up is the fact that there's a cat. There's a cat on the cover of this book. And I don't know if I'm missing something, but I didn't read any cats in any of these stories. There's a rat, like, in the shape of the cat. See, there's the rat there, the cat's here. But why is there a cat? I didn't read about a cat. Like, please tell me if I missed something, but there is no cat in this book. No cat. No cat. Like, I can see, like, maybe it references the cat and mouse game.
This twisted cat and mouse game always starts the same.
That Holly plays or is going through to try and catch Chet Ondowski. But other than that, like, why is there a cat? Why is there a cat? Like, if there's a rat on this book, rat should be here, not cat and rat. Why is there a cat here? There's another book cover that doesn't have a cat or a rat on it. It actually has, like, a man. I think he's, like, fading away or something like that. But I don't know. I didn't really like that cover either. I don't know. These covers sucked. Like, obviously you can't judge a book by its cover, and you definitely can't judge this book by its cover, because there is no cat in the book. I feel like a better idea would have been, like, having a picture of Chet here, like, mid-transformation, or, like, a collage or something of the many faces of Chet. Like, there are other things you could have done here. This just didn't make sense at all. But, like, again, what do I really know? But anyway, like, I don't know, if any of these books were put into movies or, like, TV adaptations of any sort, because I know bitches love Stephen King movies, I feel like Rat would be the best contender for a movie. I feel like that has the most potential of being on some sort of screen. It just makes the most sense to me. Overall, I would give Stephen King's If It Bleeds 3 main-shaped Donald Trump heads out of 5. Comment down below if you've read the book, what you thought about the book. Did you like it? What did you dislike about it? If you want to read it, I do recommend this book. It just wasn't my favorite, I guess. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you have any book recommendations of books I should read next, let me know those too. I would be so excited to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much for watching.
Bye.
I have other videos.